a modular kit. This step is very important as it establishes the scale reference for everything else in the scene. Unity's standard scene unit is 1 meter. It is important to respect this unit because the physics system and other movement systems are based on this assumption. This cube primitive right here is 1 meter square. We'll use this 1 meter standard for scaling all of our assets and creating the modules based on the pre-existing kit that we're working from. Here in the starting project, we're going to open up the Scenes folder in the project view. And then you'll notice there's a scene template in here. We're going to create a duplicate of this initially. Control D. The reason we're setting up a scene for editing here is that we're going to have to iterate quite a bit with these modules, make adjustments, adjust the prefabs, test them out in a workspace. So I just created a duplicate of that scene there. And then what we'll do is rename this to workspace. And the first thing I'll do is just double click to make sure it's open. And then under lighting here, we're simply going to generate lighting and then ensure that the auto generate setting is disabled. So make sure auto generate is not enabled. Let's have a look at the assets included here in the project. So we'll open up the content folder and then environment and then FBX. And you can see a preview here of the various assets that we have to work from. So we have a few barrier objects. We've got a bridge here, some broken bridge pieces, some doorway elements, various floor elements as well, some pillars, stairs, we have a statue, a few walls, some of which look kind of like blocks, and then a couple of wood planks. So this is what we have to work with. And if we look at the original concept art for this project, you can see there's a theme here of platforms and stairs and pillars and bridges. So our next step is to create a module template here in the scene. So what I'm going to do here is just right click and then create an empty. And then I'll reset the transform right here just to make sure that the position and rotation are zeroed and scale is 1. And then I'll rename this to module template. And then we'll right click on this and create 3 more empties as child objects. And then we'll rename each one of these to Geo for geometry, collision for collision objects, and then lighting to hold lighting objects. This forms our basic structure for our modules, and these will eventually become prefabs. So now what we'll do is duplicate this, Control D, and this first one will be our first floor module. So we'll rename this to Floor A. Let's duplicate this, and we'll name this to Bridge A. And then we'll duplicate this and name it Wall A. So there we are. We have 3 module templates here, Floor A, Bridge A, and Wall A. So what we'll do initially is work on the floor. In the FBX folder in our source assets, floor 1, 2, and 3 represent floor tiles, which can be assembled to form a floor module. So we'll select floors 1 through 3, drop them on Geo in floor A in the hierarchy, and then we can just move these around a bit to have a look at the way they're structured. So these are just variations on these tile objects. So what we need to do is arrange these to form a floor tile which conforms to the grid. So I'll select floor 1, and then shift-click the Y-axis on the axis widget at the top right of the scene view. This will change the view into top-down isometric mode. So what I'm going to do initially is just move these objects around. And I want to make sure that I remember where the center point is. So I'll just reselect the geo group here and look at the pivot point. Ensure you're on pivot and local here for your transform settings. And then I'm just going to arrange these here around this center point, just approximating for now. Okay, floor 2 needs to be flipped. Let's just verify our snap settings before we do anything else. So we'll go to Edit, and then Snap Settings. And ensure that you have Move X, Y, and Z on 0.25, Scale set to 0.1, and Rotation set to 15. Now we'll hold down Control to engage snapping. And what we want to do is just scale this so that it flips over. And if you watch the transform scale carefully in the inspector, we're just going to scale this so that on the y-axis it goes to an exact -1. And you can see that just flips the texture and geometry over. And then for floor number 3 here, we do need to rotate this. So again, I'll hold down Control and rotate this 180 degrees. And then using the Move tool, I'll just slide this into place here. Looks like it fits there just fine. Then we need one more tile here for the missing piece. So what we'll do is I'm going to duplicate number 2, move this up here. Make sure you hold down Control, and then we'll just rotate 180, and we'll slide that into place. Zoom in a little bit here. We need to slide these in so that they meet each other along the center here of the module. And then we need to adjust the scale of each one so that the edges of the geometry line up with the grid here. So the way that we'll do that is we're going to use the Rect tool right here. This is really convenient for what we need to do because we can simply grab these edges like this here. Now we do want to be careful about distortion. So I'm just going to carefully move those in there to hit that center line. And then I'm just going to scale this down here a bit. It's critical that the geometry align to the grid. Otherwise, when we snap our modules together in the scene, nothing will line up correctly. So this part is really important here. So we'll bring that in, bring this up to the grid line there, align these two edges. Same thing with the rest of them. So we'll just bring this in, close up that seam, bring this edge over, move these together, bring these edges down. Almost there. Okay, looking pretty good there. So you can see we've just adjusted the arrangement and scale of these objects to fit perfectly within the grid here. Incidentally, if you want to toggle the grid, you can go to the Gizmos menu right here, and you can turn off the grid or turn it on right here. Okay, so those look pretty close. Let's go ahead and switch to the x-axis. So using the axis widget here in the top right, I'll click on X and then adjust my view. Now I do want to make sure that I have a reference for the center point of the module. So I'll just select floor A and then switch back to the Move tool so I can see where the pivot is. So the pivot is right here. Now we need to decide where we want the pivot to be relative to the geometry. For this particular project, it makes sense to have the pivot point sitting flush at the top of the geometry because the levels will be composed primarily of towers, and we have a top-down camera, so we really need accuracy for placement based on the top surface. So what we'll do next is I'll just select the floor modules here in the hierarchy, and then just move them down, zoom in a little bit here for accuracy. So again, I'm just visually aligning the top surface of the geometry with that grid line. If I reselect floor A, you can see that grid line now is lined up perfectly right there. Because the level design calls for raised platforms in a cave-like environment, we need to add some blocks below this so that we can arrange these freely in our level layouts. So let's have a look in our FBX assets again. There are a couple wall objects in here which are blocks. So wall 1 is one of them here. So I'll bring this FBX object and just drop it again on that geo group here in floor A. And then switch back to the y-axis view. And what I need to do initially is, again, use that Rect tool just to scale this and align it with a grid. Then I'll switch to the x-axis. And initially, I'll just move this down here. I'm just going to visually align this to the base of these tiles. The height of this doesn't really have to line up with the grid because, again, we're dealing with these raised platforms. Now we have another block in here which does not have this carved detail. So let's bring this one in. Again, we'll drop it on Geo. Go back to that y-axis. Same process, Rect tool. Bring the edges in just to line those up with a grid. There we go, back to the x-axis. And then Move tool, and I'm just going to slide this down. And then create a few duplicates. to build this platform. So again, just Control D to duplicate and then slide these down. I'll add 2 more from here. Duplicate. And again, I'm just lining this up by eye. Should be close enough. I've got a little gap in that one there, so let's tighten that up. Okay, and now I'm just going to pop back into perspective mode here and have a look. Let me turn off lighting. All right, that looks pretty good. If you'd like, you can spin a few of these around. There is a texture repeat, which is visible here. So optionally, you could rotate a few of these blocks. You could even scale one. Again, holding Control, just to build some variation there of the texture along the side to avoid a visual repeat. So there's our first module for floor A. So let's go ahead and capture this as a prefab. If you scroll down below the FBXs, there is a modules folder set up for us here. So what I'm going to do is simply drag floor A into that modules folder to capture it as a prefab. And this will give us the option to make modifications to it and save those later. All right, that's our first module. In the next video, we'll create a few more.